We thought that the human race was the best for warriors. We didn't take their pride in writing by feeling lovely seriously enough. The first part. By cosmic standards, the humans were still young when we found their system. We thought they were much younger. But most species form groups and start moving into other worlds within their own systems as soon as they figure out how to talk to each other across long distances. People, on the other hand, had spent most of their time and energy fighting on their one small rock. In the big scheme of things, this wasn't unusual, but because they were so violent, most species died out before they could even fly. Even though humans were naturally violent, they had found a way to not only survive, but also grow. Tales of glory in battle, putting a lot of time and effort into weapons of mass destruction, and even smaller battles for fun and sport, were all classic signs of a society that values war. They often fought without weapons, and then laughed and drank together afterward. They were still pretty wild, but not as wild as most other fighting groups. When a member of their race was born deformed, they wouldn't just throw it on the rocks or even kill it, which is what my race did before we were brought into the Empire to work as experts. No, they did, however, have ways to care for people born this way for their whole lives. I'm not well, but I care anyway. At first, my study looked very promising. Humans were much stronger than usual for their size. Their mass was big enough to be scary, but not so big that the ships had to be redesigned. With the right gear, they could live in a wide range of temperatures and adjust to very low amounts of the chemicals they need to stay alive, even those in the air. Compared to other species of the same size, they didn't need as many nutrients. They worked best in groups, but they could also think and act on their own. They had even made a car that could almost go in any direction to help them fight. Even though it looked like it would take a lot of training, they didn't use breed to make people who could fly it. That might have been the most amazing thing about people. Most of the time, any person could do almost any job. It wasn't in their genes to be certain. People even thought they chose their own leaders. At first, this didn't make sense. I thought it was about caste breeding. It turned out that people chose the leaders based on something they called money. Someone has tried to explain it to me several times, but I still don't get it. The people above me were just as hopeful when I showed them my reports as I was. Different races from different worlds lived together in the Nikhil Empire, but there was no fighting race. If we weren't so good at science, we would have been wiped out many times by now. The Kef Empire had not been swayed by our trade offers, unfortunately, and they were now starting to rapidly move into our territory. People could be the key to our future. As our ships went into orbit, they sent a message to everyone in the world in every language we knew. We're coming in peace. It seemed like a good idea because they had several stories about great fights against unknown species. We thought these were just stories, but we got a response inviting us to something they called the United Nations, which didn't seem very united. Our offer was pretty easy. You can join our kingdom and fight for us. We told them about our cutting-edge technology. That didn't make sense. The heads of the UN looked at that didn't make sense. The leaders of the United Nations thought about our plan and talked about it until my boss, Zachner, got bored. That is quite an accomplishment, if I may say so. Zachner was a Trillian, which is a race that was created from birth to solve hard tasks. They didn't even have any limbs. They moved things with their minds so that they wouldn't get weak. Zachjar thought it would be a good idea to send the offer out to everyone, not just this small group of human leaders, and to use something that humans already had for military recruiting stations. The response from the people was huge. People from all over the world, millions of them, rushed the makeshift tables we had set up in every major city, ready to join and fight for the kingdom. Even though a lot of them want to know the same weird thing. Do we get Gundams? I now know they were talking about big robot suits. It's a silly idea in general, but I can see how it could be fun for a war race. The human leaders had no choice but to take the Empire up on her offer and start merging right away. That's when things went wrong. First, we had to figure out how to add the Chang, which is the death sign of the small plasma rifle drone, to the armor we had made for them. It is now on the shoulder and is linked to the neural link. This lets people fire with line-of-sight targeting faster and more accurately than we ever thought possible. I was very angry when I saw this. I thought I hit it hard, but the hot air coming out of my dorsal vent was too clear in the human environment on the ships. People told me that steam was coming out of my ears. When I asked them why, all they said was, "Dude, predator." And that was the first thing they said. The second part. In the first 2 weeks, the changes people made to their tools, and our ships went from being strange to being completely crazy. They took off the caps on each small ship's acceleration, so when they were fully accelerated, they would pull on the driver 5 times as hard as Earth's gravity does. Even worse, they had grouped several of them together like one of their trains, which they used to move large amounts of goods and seemed to be using to teach kids how to drive. A space coaster is what they called it. I saw one of these training scenarios and saw this space coaster do moves that wouldn't work in a dogfight. Also, I still don't get it. I guess that's why my species is better at being researchers than fighters. The human kids seemed to enjoy something that I thought was scary. At that point, I thought it was best for me to stop keeping an eye on the changes people were making. Zachner agreed with me, and for some reason, took over as lead study liaison from me. He said something about creative engineering being fun, but I thought he was just rambling, as I often do. I worked on the food system instead. When the Empire brought us in, our replicators were the pride of our species. They were machines that could break down non-edible matter into its chemical parts and then mix them back together to make a healthy paste. It wasn't liked by the humans, but some of the older ones said it was better than MREs, which I took as a praise because it was better than their own food replicators. Sadly, it wasn't easy to change it so that it could make things that people liked. It would be great if I could say I finished this job before people told me to. But the Keth struck again after less than 1 full Earth month of being together. I sat in the contact center with people from the Empire's different species. Angeli, a mineral expert, said that even though most of them were short compared to humans, their noses could smell different ores, and they loved getting them out of the ground, sometimes using only the keratin protrusions on their upper limbs. A Horgan senator named Regaxna. I had always heard that her feathers were beautiful, and they were, and it made sense that they were the ones who created most of the Empire's culture. Zachner as a study representative, and 6 humans who went by the name United Command. Their United Nations didn't seem united at all, but these did. They even wore clothes that were the same. It was Nozek's 4th movie that I showed them, and gave a short explanation of. My voice was sent through translators to each representative's ears. Nozek's 4 is a moon that orbits the gas giant Nozex. It is about 244.639 light-years away from us. The world is on the edge of the Empire, but it is a full member and not just a resource port. I heard Anjali snort in disapproval, but I kept going. The only surface recording device that was not destroyed was the one that sent us this record. It was left completely whole. When I played the video, a 3D image of a small part of the city appeared on the table, showing a huge Keth walking through it and killing anything that moved. As one of them, who looked like a war leader, moved forward, the projection changed, and he stood on the table. "Please send your troops to us. We want to get our kids a toy." As a small Horgan ran by, it growled and grabbed it, pushing its beak open. At that point, I stopped the replay. I was aware that the cruelty that would follow would be too much. It was shaking for Senator Bergaxon. I wasn't sure if it was anger or something like the human's sad face. When I breathed air out of my dorsal vents, people could see them more clearly than I would have liked. My species tried its best to hide its feelings. As you can see, we may need to speed up the process of integrating humans. Admiral Johnson, how many ships are all set to go? The person closest to the head of the table, a male of the species who was showing some signs of age, but seemed to be in good health overall, spoke. There are 3 frigates, 2 destroyers, and a carrier. The carrier has all of its fighters on board. So 52 fighters, sir, said a woman with dark skin across the table. The old man nodded his head. Master of jumps. He turned his head to look at a rough-looking man. I have trained more troops than we could ever think to send out. It will be impossible to stop them all from going at this point. He looked back at the table and said, Good. Could you play the clip from when the big guy was standing here? I did what he asked and pressed a few buttons to go back to the time before the war leader grabbed the Horkin. It would have been about half as tall as a person when fully grown, but the image showed it much smaller. It had dark armor on most of its body, but its 4 upper limbs and thick lower limbs could still be seen. It had 6 separate complex eyes on its head, so there were no blend spots on its face. Can you grab that tail? I later heard that they called her Doc, which I'm not sure why. She was an old woman. I responded, We're not sure. We think it's more of a hitting tool than a limb because of the keratin protrusions. Is that true for all of their weapons? She inquired. Yes, I answered, even though the question seemed odd. The humans did like ballistics, but that was before they were sent to space, where everyone used energy weapons because ballistic projection needs a lot of movement. The older human said again. He got up from his chair and said, Tell the 82nd, one-armed 1st Night Witches, 1st Commandos, and the Jagger Regiment were wheels up at 8 o'clock. I became lost. Surely you're not asking that we deploy right now? I inquired. Even with a very rough schedule, we still have years of integration to go, and we haven't even finished the food replicators yet. The old person looked at me. We're going to eat the toothpaste. The air coming out of my dorsal vents was so cold that it almost frozen the water in it. Did we make something worse than the Keith? The third part. Sergeant White was on the bridge of the NX-01 ship that had been changed so that people could live on it. Since he was a bit different, he didn't jump at the chance to join the company when it came up. He had been a doctor for the U.S. Army Rangers and seen the worst of war. He didn't want to see any more. However, when Zachner looked over all the personnel records in the early days of integration, he asked Sergeant White to join the team working on integration and growth. He thought it would be very helpful to have an electrical engineer with experience in the military. In the message, he seemed so excited that Sergeant White didn't want to tell the stranger that he mostly just made custom guitar pedals. He looked out the view screens and saw that the small group of humans was getting ready to leave. Before the skip jump, the ships would have to fly through space to get to Mars. If they did it too close to Earth, it could mess up the atmosphere of the planet and the huge space docks, where hundreds of ships were being modified to help in the battle if it went on. He came out of his thoughts when Senator Bragaxina spoke. Her voice was a soft song that sounded a lot like the parakeets his mother had. He was a little let down that the interpreters took away the beauty of the words. He replied as he looked at her, You humans are very strange for charging into battle at the first chance. Look at our past. We've always wanted to be the good guys, fight evil, and win. This is a great idea that has been around for a long time, but you finally gave us a chance to do it. As her translation turned his words into chips and trills, her feathers moved. I'm not sure I understand how to fight evil. The Keth are not bad. Like yours, they are just a species that likes to fight. The trills didn't sound as bad as the words themselves. Sergeant White made a noise. There are no videos of us killing kids. To kill children, you watched the movie. They grabbed that kid of your species and put a blaster in its mouth. Oh, the Horkin song almost had a funny tone to it. It wasn't a child. There are many types of my species, but our young don't have all of their feathers yet. Sergeant White thought for a moment before he spoke again. It was only short, right? Yes. It was clear that the song was now having fun. It's now too late to go back. He smiled as he found a place and put on his safety belt. You might want to fasten your car belt. Even though the senator looked lost at first, she quickly found a place and buckled up. just like everyone else. Commander Rodriguez told the ensigns and other control staff to go through the pre-flight checklist before giving the order to leave. The movement was strong at first, but it only lasted a short time. As the ship moved from orbit up to a safe speed, it caused a lot of force, but the inertial dampeners on board kept everyone safe. It was just two geese. All of us could hear the senator writhe. It was strange because she looked like a bird. Sergeant White wasn't even sure if birds could throw up. Throw up, though, was what hit the floor. Aliens threw up. After taking off his seatbelt, he thought to himself, "Neat." He then went to comfort the senator. It had been attached to a nearby console, but Zachner took his flotation device off of that wire. Sergeant White could hear his words. "You were right. It was fun." From what I hear, Senator Bernac's response is actually part of the fun. As Captain Rodriguez walked over, Sergeant White let out a soft laugh. "I am truly sorry, Senator," Commander said. "I should have warned you." She then gave the senator a warm towel to clean up. "That's not a very strong force for us, and I forgot to mention the team that isn't human." She pushed the button on her chest for communication, and her eyes got really big. "The whole human crew of the Nixley Empire ship Classic. This is your leader. Check on all of the animal crew. In case someone needs medical help, please take them to Med Bay." She spoke quickly because she was scared that she had just shown that she didn't care about the other species in the Empire. Yes, indeed. Most likely, all of the Galgians in the engine room will need to be set on fire. That kind of force would have thrown off the balance of the fluids, and it will take some time for them to get back to normal. Zachna talked to the captain out loud by using the projector on his float that was attached to it. He didn't like it, but most of the humans had told him they didn't like the psychic contact he liked better. Sergeant White got up and started to go down with Zachmer to the engine room. The galleons were hive-mind creatures, but each one was its own little colony. When they grouped up to move on water, they were a lot like ants. They kind of looked like algae. They were amazing workers because they could get to every part of an engine that their fluids could reach. Things seemed calm when the doors to the engine room opened. Officer Scott stood in front of what looked like a tank and saw a green mass floating there. The mass seemed irritated. "What do you mean? It wasn't a good idea. Did it work?" Sergeant Scott was yelling at the tank. A speaker attached to the tank let out a deep voice. "Not doing much harm does not automatically mean success. What's going on?" Sergeant White spoke up. Petty Officer Scott snapped to attention, but when he saw the captain and Zechnar, he calmed down. "Oh, you're the only one." He let out a sigh of relief. "Before the acceleration, I made Greenie and his friends get into this section and pumped it up. Now it's mad and telling me it wasn't a good plan." He used his thumb to point to the tank. Sergeant White thought he could hear Zachnar laughing. People are so creative when it comes to fixing problems. The fourth part. The green mass in the tank yelled over the speakers. "We don't like to touch each other. I wasn't going to wait an hour for you to get all of your bits back," the petty officer said, pointing to the lower parts of the tank where some small green chunks floated away from the main mass of the galleon. "Diagnostic report," Sergeant White barked because he was afraid that if he let it go on, this could turn into something that would need to be looked into by the HR team. While sending a word to the Sorentia, Zachner seemed to understand how she felt without having to think about it. "Yes, this is very close to what people of your species call racism, and that Toby guy is awful." Scott took a tablet out of a holster on his hip and said, "Bluey and Red are checking now. The first tests look good, but it's harder than we've ever pushed any of these engines, and they seem to be staying steady, mate. We're only at 9% of light speed. You forgot how to act like a soldier." A rough voice yelled from the room's doors. Sergeant White turned around and Prebe Officer Scott stood up straight. Master Sergeant Lee stood just inside the door with his uniform neatly pressed. Besides being a professional soldier before integration, he was a pretty tall man. "Hey, Master Sergeant. How are you?" Sergeant White smiled and said, Everyone saw the man get stiff. He quickly became more and more angry. "Sergeant White, you should show respect to your bosses. I am your NQO in charge." Actually, Zachner's voice came from the speakers on his device that helped him float. "I am." He thought about it for a moment, but he had to say something. "This is the ship for study and integration. It's not a military one. By being there, it helps my team better bring your species into the state. Sergeant White is the only person on my team with a human voice, and he is second only to me. But this ship's only job is to make the tools the Empire gave us work for people. So it doesn't have any weapons." Zachner could feel all three people moving in an uncomfortable way. That's what he thought the Master Sergeant would say. It made him happy to think about putting on one of these power shows he had heard about. He thought that people would respect him more for it. "How are you, Sergeant White?" He spoke straight into the man's head to get advice. He said it made things go faster. So the Sock was one of the few people who seemed to like talking to each other mentally. He was very surprised when the Sock answered out loud. "I'm sorry, buddy. We have everything we need," he replied. At this point, the other two seemed to calm down. Master Sergeant Lee did shoot in, but only with defensive guns. "You know that's not true." White fired back as sergeant. "It doesn't get any softer with the rounds." "How many rounds?" It was Zachner who asked through his speakers. "Yes, of course." "This is amazing." Scott, a naval officer, joined the conversation. White came up with the idea. "We turned the bolt drivers you used to build ships into rail guns. It was also easy to make bombs out of the fusion engine that heats the ship." Right away, Zachner made a stronger mental connection with Sergeant White. They used this connection to talk about more than just words, like how they felt and what they were thinking. It could be a problem because human thinking was different from his own, but after practice, it worked well enough that he and Sergeant White could quickly share their thoughts. However, what he felt was incredibly scary. There is a center point that all 6 barrels spin around. The magnetic accelerators of the bolt driver don't have a safety limiter, so chunks of ore are spit forward quickly. He could feel Sergeant White's memories of the tests, saw the bullets break up a meteor, and was let down by how quiet the weapon was. This was carried on all of the big ships. A smaller version was carried by even the troops. "That's why you asked for all those wrenches, right?" Zachner looked at his speakers and asked. "You have them with you." People thought that since the Keth use energy weapons, they might not be ready for physical ones, sir. "That's actually a reasonable hypothesis," the Master Sergeant replied. Sergeant White knew that Zachner's soft noise was laughing. "You can come up with amazing ideas." A new voice from the tank said, "Diagnostics are done." When Zachner and Sergeant White turned back to look at the tank, they saw that the green mass had been joined by a blue and a red mass. The speaker said that all devices were working normally. "Great," answered Sergeant White. "Scott, next time put each person in their own area, and maybe put pressure on them one at a time." "Yes, that would be fine," the Galleons answered. There was a sense of harmony, but the translator to speaker in their tank couldn't really tell the difference between sounds. It would have been hard to tell anyway, since each colony had a few thousand sounds. "Sergeant, don't be so hard on Scott." As he walked past the man and out the door into the long hallway to the lift, the sergeant said, "We're trying to make this a more relaxed place." Even though he heard the man grunt in disapproval, he kept walking. "What else did you not tell me?" His mind kept going back to Zachner's words. He could tell it was bothering her. "It doesn't bother me that the ship was armed, but you should have told me." "Yeah, sorry about that, but it's better to be safe than sorry since we don't know what we're getting into." The sergeant remembered. "It's over now, right?" The sergeant laughed. "Wait until you see the big man." Even though the mental link was only slight, he knew that some of his energy was getting out. "What is it?"